The morning of my granddaughter Emily's graduation began like any ordinary day, though there was a heaviness in the air I couldn't quite name. The sky over Manchester was a sheet of pale gray, the kind that looks soft from afar but sinks into your skin like cold breath when you step outside. I remember standing by the window, watching the drizzle paint thin silver lines on the glass, each drop crawling downward as if unsure of its own direction. It mirrored how I felt inside, quiet, slowed, almost suspended. At my age, days tend to blend into one another, but that one carried a strange vibration, as if something in the routine was about to crack open. I'd woken early, made my usual cup of Earl Grey, the steam rising in delicate curls that reminded me of Lucy, my late wife, humming softly as she used to do while waiting for the kettle to whistle. The house felt too silent without her. Even after 7 years, I still sometimes turned my head, expecting to see her at the doorway, hands tucked into her cardigan pockets, eyes sparkling with that secret understanding spouses share without words. The memory floated in and out like a warm breeze, and for a moment I let myself lean into it before shaking it off. Today was important. Today I needed to be present. Emily's graduation. I'd circled the date on the small calendar pinned to the refrigerator months ago. I'd told my daughter Claire that I would be there early. She'd replied with a short, "Okay, Dad," the kind that tried to sound neutral, but always carried an echo of distance. Our relationship had become a patchwork of polite exchanges, stitched together by necessity rather than closeness. Still, Emily was different. She always made me feel folded into the family, even when the others didn't quite know where to place me. I dressed carefully, my dark gray suit pressed the night before, the navy tie Emily had given me for Christmas 2 years ago, the one with the tiny silver diagonal stripes. She'd chosen it because, according to her, it made me look distinguished. I smiled at the thought as I smoothed the fabric. The drizzle turned to rain by the time I stepped outside, heavier now, tapping against the umbrella like impatient fingers. The wind carried that earthy scent of wet pavement and distant chimney smoke, a smell that always took me back to my boyhood, running through the narrow streets with my best friend Arthur, kicking a battered football down puddle-filled alleys. It's strange how certain scents resurrect entire worlds you'd nearly forgotten. The drive to the college took longer than expected. The rain thickened, blurring the windscreen despite the wipers working at full speed. Cars lined the narrow road leading up to the campus entrance, families rushing in under shared umbrellas, laughter echoing faintly through the storm. I parked farther away than I'd hoped, near a row of trees that swayed under the weight of the wind. I glanced at the clock. I was still early, 25 minutes before guests were expected to enter. That soothed me a little. As I approached the entrance, something shifted. People were gathering in clusters, some checking phones, some pointing to signs, and a strange, restless energy rippled through the air. I walked up to a volunteer standing by the check-in table, a young man with curly hair and a neon vest, and gave him my name. He scanned the list once, twice, then frowned. "Sir, your name isn't on the reserved seating list," he said gently, like he already anticipated the disappointment forming behind my eyes. I blinked. There must be a mistake. "My granddaughter, Emily Dawson, she told me she'd saved me a seat." He shook his head with a sympathetic tilt. "I'm sorry. Only those on the list can enter the main hall. It's completely full." For a second, the rain seemed to hush around me, the world narrowing to those words. Not on the list. Not saved a seat. Not allowed inside. I felt foolish standing there, holding my umbrella slightly crooked, my tie cooling against my throat. I stepped aside, letting families pass, their voices bright and full of anticipation. I didn't want anyone seeing my confusion, or worse, the sting I felt blooming beneath my ribs. I checked my phone, half hoping for a message from Claire or Emily explaining the misunderstanding, but the screen stayed dark. A small memory flickered. Lucy again, squeezing my hand gently the day Emily was born, whispering, "She'll be our light, Henry, our second chance to get family right." And maybe that's why the crack hurt deeper, because Emily had always been that, my quiet hope. The rain intensified, and I retreated toward the car, each step sinking heavier than the last. I sat behind the wheel, watching the streams of family members disappearing into the building, their umbrellas bobbing like colorful lanterns. The windows fogged slightly from my breath, blurring the world outside into soft shapes. For a long moment, I just sat there, listening to the rain, feeling the weight of being forgotten settle over me. Yet beneath all that heaviness, a strange clarity began to form. Not bitterness, more like a quiet recognition that something in my life had been shifting for a while. As if this moment wasn't just an accident, but a sign pointing me toward a truth I hadn't wanted to face. And in that stillness, I felt a tug, a reminder that stories like mine deserve to be shared, that others might see themselves in these small heartbreaks. So if you're listening, if you've ever felt left out in a moment that should have held you close, stay with me. And if you want to keep journeying through stories like this, you're welcome to join me by subscribing so we can keep meeting like old friends in places like this. As I sat there, the rain tapping rhythmically on the roof, an idea began to take shape. Something small, bittersweet, and strangely hopeful. Something I knew I needed to do before driving away. I sat there in the car for longer than I intended, the rain softening into a mist that clung to the windows like a thin memory refusing to fade. My hands rested loosely on the steering wheel, and I could feel the pulse in my fingertips, slow and steady, as if my body was trying to remind me I was still here, still real, even if I felt invisible in that moment. The quietness inside the car wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, and I let myself sink into it because sometimes silence is the only place where the truth speaks clearly. I kept thinking about Emily, about the little girl who used to run into my arms with paint on her hands, leaving tiny fingerprints on my shirts as if marking me as hers. She used to call me Grandpa Hen because she couldn't pronounce Henry properly. I could still hear the way she giggled when she said it, her voice bright, like the spring sunshine coming through the windows of our old house. It felt impossible to reconcile that image with the reality that she hadn't saved me a seat at her graduation. The thought dug itself into me like a gentle blade, soft at first, but sharper the longer I held it. A part of me wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that maybe Claire had told her I wouldn't make it, or maybe there had been limitations on seating. But another part, the quieter and more honest part, whispered something different. It reminded me of all the times I had felt myself drifting to the edges of their lives, like a book once cherished now left on a high shelf, too far to reach but too sentimental to throw away. That thought stung, but it also felt eerily familiar, like a tune I had heard before and pretended not to recognize. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. Memories began to surface, not in clear images but in sensations, warmth, laughter, the sound of Lucy's knitting needles clicking rhythmically by the fireplace. She had been the bridge between me and the rest of the family, the one who softened my rough edges and turned my silences into something comforting instead of intimidating. She understood how my mind worked, how I often loved quietly and from the background. After she passed, I tried to step forward to fill that space she'd left behind, but my attempts always felt clumsy, like trying to speak a language I'd forgotten. There were moments with Emily, small but golden, where I thought maybe I was doing something right, helping her with her history project, taking her to that small bakery she loved, the one with the raspberry tarts she devoured in 2 bites. She would sit across from me, swinging her legs under the table, telling me about school and friends and dreams that shifted every week. And I would listen, soaking up every word because her voice made the world feel less empty. I thought about those days now, and a bittersweet warmth spread through me. But beneath it lay another emotion, one I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. I realized I had been hoping this graduation would be a kind of turning point for us, a chance to feel woven back into the fabric of her life in a way I hadn't felt in years. Maybe that's why the empty seat hurt so much. Not because of the mistake itself, but because it echoed something I'd been trying hard not to admit, that I had already been slipping from her world long before today. The contrast between what I felt and what I wanted became painfully clear. I had gone there seeking belonging, seeking the warmth of being needed. Instead, I found myself alone, parked at the far edge of the celebration like an afterthought. And in that strange, raw space between disappointment and acceptance, I felt something shift inside me, like the quiet cracking of ice beneath the surface. I stared out through the fogged glass, watching the blurred silhouettes of families walking past, laughing, hugging, taking photos in the rain despite their damp hair and soaked shoes. They looked so alive in their chaos, so present in their togetherness. I wondered when was the last time I'd been part of a moment like that. The question settled in my chest, uncomfortable and heavy. Had I done something wrong along the way? Had I not shown up enough? Had I been too quiet, too distant, too me? My mind drifted to the conversation I'd had with Claire a year ago. She told me I was too intense sometimes, that my presence made Emily feel pressured. I remember feeling my throat tighten, not from anger, but from confusion. Pressured? All I had ever wanted was to support her in the ways I knew how. But maybe my silence, my old-fashioned ways, my need to hold on to traditions, maybe it had all felt too heavy for a girl growing up in a world much louder and faster than mine. Still, I couldn't accept that it meant she didn't care. People who don't care don't give thoughtful gifts like that navy tie. People who don't care don't send photos of their paintings because they made Grandpa's house look less lonely. No, caring was there. I'd felt it. I just didn't know where it had gone, or why it had suddenly felt so fragile between us. As these thoughts tangled and untangled themselves inside my mind, I felt my heart soften, not harden. The hurt was still there, sharp and real, but it was layered with understanding, with an old man's patience, with memories that reminded me love doesn't disappear just because it changes shape. And beneath that, there was a quiet resolve forming. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I felt it like a faint compass pointing somewhere new. I wasn't ready to drive away, not just yet, not without leaving something behind. So I reached for the small wooden box on the passenger seat. I had brought it for Emily, a gift I had worked on for weeks. I brushed my thumb over the lid, feeling the carved edges, the initials on top. Maybe she hadn't saved me a seat. Maybe I was meant to watch her from afar, but she would still know I had been there. She would know I had shown up in the way I could, and as that thought settled into me, warm and steady, I felt the story inside me continue to unfold, pulling me toward a moment I didn't yet fully understand, but knew I needed to face. I sat there holding the box on my lap, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my fingers as if it were breathing, as if it carried some quiet pulse of its own. I'd carved it from a piece of walnut I'd kept in my shed for years, saving it for something meaningful, something that deserved the care it would take. I'd never said those words aloud to anyone, how the act of carving calmed my mind, how the scent of shaved wood brought me peace, how working with my hands connected me to a version of myself that felt clearer, more solid. Maybe that's why I made the box for Emily. It was the most honest way I knew to give love. Not loud, not flashy, just steady, careful, patient. I opened it slowly, the hinge making a soft clicking sound that reminded me of winter evenings when Emily used to ask me to fix her toys. She'd sit beside me in the workshop, swinging her legs off the tall stool, handing me screws, asking endless questions about why things broke and how they could be made whole again. She always looked at the world like it was something she wanted to understand piece by piece. I loved that about her, that curiosity, that spark. I wondered if she still had it, or if adulthood had begun to dull her edges the way it does for so many of us. Inside the box, nestled in a small bed of cotton, lay the silver locket that had belonged to Lucy. I'd polished it until I could see my own reflection, distorted and softened in its curve. Lucy had always said Emily reminded her of herself. "Same fire in her eyes, Henry," she would whisper with a smile, brushing Emily's curls back from her forehead when she was still small enough to fall asleep on our couch. Giving the locket to Emily felt like giving her a piece of Lucy, a part of our history, a thread that tied us all together. Maybe that's why today hurt so deeply. The box represented everything I wanted to pass on, yet there I was, outside, unacknowledged. As I traced the edge of the locket, another memory surfaced, unexpected, almost intrusive. The day Lucy got sick, the coldness of the hospital hallway, the way Emily clutched my hand tighter than she ever had before. She was only 13 then, fragile yet brave, her voice shaking when she asked me if Grandma would be okay. I told her the truth as gently as I could, but inside I felt myself shattering in slow, deliberate pieces. After Lucy passed, Emily hugged me with a fierceness I didn't expect. "We still have each other," she whispered, tears soaking into the shoulder of my sweater. At the time, I believed her. I held on to that sentence like a lifeline. But life has a way of rearranging what once felt certain. Grief changed us in different ways. Claire threw herself into work, burying herself in tasks and responsibilities, keeping her emotions tucked away behind sharp efficiency. Emily grew quieter for a while, then busier, then distant in a way that wasn't unkind, just the natural drift of youth moving forward while age stays behind. And I withdrew into routines, filling my days with small rituals that helped me stay afloat. Trimming the hedges every Saturday, polishing Lucy's teacups, reading the newspaper from front to back, even when the headlines exhausted me. Maybe I thought, if I kept the world around me in order, the emptiness inside would feel less chaotic. Holding that box, I realized how long I had been trying to recreate a space where I still felt needed. How desperately I wanted Emily to feel the weight of the locket and understand everything I'd poured into it. I wanted her to feel loved in the quiet ways I knew how to give love. But love that isn't received begins to feel like a whisper lost in a crowded room. And maybe that's what I feared most, that my whisper had grown too soft to reach her. I watched the door of the graduation hall from the fogged window, the silhouettes of families moving inside like shadows behind frosted glass. Everyone was finding their seats, brushing raindrops from their shoulders, straightening jackets and dresses. Somewhere inside that large, glowing room, Emily was probably lining up with her classmates, adjusting her cap, taking photos with friends. I imagined her laughing, her cheeks flushed from excitement, her eyes shining with the thrill of the moment. I wanted to see that. I wanted to be part of that. But instead, I was here, outside, holding a gift she might never know I brought. A question formed in my mind, one I hadn't dared to articulate before. When did I become someone who waited outside the door of his own family? The thought was painful in its simplicity. Was it a gradual slipping, or a single moment that pushed me to the margins? Had I stopped fighting for my place? Or had they stopped making room for me? I didn't know. And maybe the truth was a combination of both. Yet even as these questions swirled around me, I realized something else, something surprising. I wasn't angry, not truly. There was hurt, yes, and disappointment that settled deep. But underneath all of that, there was still love, steady, stubborn love that refused to sour. Love that wished her well, even from afar. Love that understood she was growing into her own life, one that might not always include me in the way I hoped. And that realization brought a strange sense of peace, because maybe this moment, this pain, wasn't an ending. Maybe it was an invitation to shift, to let go of certain expectations, to find new ways to show up. Ways that didn't depend on being physically present in the front row, but emotionally present in her life, even if she didn't always see it. I closed the box gently and exhaled. The rain had slowed to a faint drizzle again, the droplets tapping lightly against the car roof like fingertips drumming in thought. I rolled down the window just enough to let in the cool, earthy scent of wet grass and pavement. There was something cleansing about it, something that made me feel more awake. I knew then that I needed to do something I'd never done before, something that carried both vulnerability and resolve. Not a confrontation, not a lecture, not a plea, but a gesture, something that said, I was here, I showed up, and even if you didn't see me today, I still believe in you. And that belief, it stirred something inside me that felt almost like courage. I sat there for a long moment, holding the box as though it were the last fragile bridge between me and the world inside that hall. But something in me shifted when the wind picked up, pushing tiny ripples across the puddles in the parking lot. It was like the day itself was nudging me, whispering that waiting wasn't enough, that love sometimes needs movement, even if the steps feel uncertain. I wiped a patch of fog from the window and glanced toward the building. Families still hurried past, their faces bright and flushed from the excitement. I couldn't follow them in, but it didn't mean I had to disappear entirely. So I opened the car door and let the cool air settle around me. The drizzle sprinkled gently against my coat, soaking into the fabric but refreshing, almost grounding. I placed the box securely under my arm and started walking toward the campus garden. the only quiet place I knew I could reach without passing through the guarded entrance. It was tucked beside the old library, a space Emily used to love when she was younger. She would sit with her sketchbook on the stone bench beneath the maple tree, drawing people who walked past without realizing they were becoming part of her little world. That garden felt like the right place to gather myself, to decide what to do. As I walked, my shoes splashed through shallow puddles, sending tiny arcs of water onto my trousers. The air smelled of wet leaves and faint traces of lilacs that lingered from the bushes near the path. I remembered sitting there with Emily once, the sunlight dripping through the branches while she drew my portrait. She had scrunched her eyebrows in fierce concentration, tongue poking out slightly, determined to get every detail right. When she showed me the drawing, I laughed because she had given me an impossibly large mustache. She burst into giggles, insisting it suited me better that way. That memory came back so vividly, it almost felt like I could hear her laughter echoing between the trees. The garden was empty now, quiet except for the gentle patter of rain hitting the leaves. The maple tree still stood tall, its branches stretching wide like open arms. I walked over to the old stone bench and sat down, letting the coolness seep through my trousers. The box rested on my lap again, and I stared at it, wondering what Lucy would say if she were here. She had always been the brave one, the one who insisted that vulnerability wasn't weakness but proof of love. She would have pushed me gently toward honesty. "Say what's in your heart, Henry," she would whisper, "even if your voice shakes." And maybe that was the moment everything crystallized inside me. I realized that what hurt most wasn't the missing seat. It was the missing understanding. Emily didn't know how much this day meant to me, how much I longed to be part of her world, even in small ways. Not because I needed recognition, but because she was one of the last living threads connecting me to the life Lucy and I built together. She represented continuity, hope, the future. And she didn't know she'd left me outside. How could she, if I'd never truly told her what she meant to me? The weight of that truth settled over me like the rain. Steady, unavoidable, cleansing. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small envelope I had tucked there earlier. It had been meant as a simple congratulatory note, a few sentences of pride and well-wishing. But now, sitting under that maple tree with my heart open and raw, I knew the letter needed to be more than that. It needed to be honest. It needed to tell her everything I had been afraid to say. I took out my pen. The rain was gentle enough that the paper stayed mostly dry beneath the shelter of my arm. My handwriting wavered slightly at first, the way it always did when my emotions ran high. But soon the words flowed with a surprising steadiness. I wrote about the day she was born, about how Lucy cried from happiness and whispered that Emily would be our new beginning. I wrote about the afternoons we spent together, the stories she shared, the way her laughter used to fill the house like sunlight. I wrote about Lucy's locket, how she had wanted Emily to have it someday, and how I had waited for graduation because I thought it was the kind of milestone Lucy would have celebrated with all her heart. But I also wrote about today, how I had come early, how I had hoped to sit among the sea of families and cheer for her as loudly as my aging voice allowed. I didn't write with accusation or bitterness. I wrote with sincerity. I told her that even from the parking lot, I was proud of her. That seeing her walk across that stage, even from a distance through a window, or not at all, didn't change how deeply I believed in her. And then, almost without thinking, I wrote the sentence that surprised even me. "You don't have to make space for me to love you. I'll love you from wherever I'm allowed to stand." When I finished, my throat felt tight and my eyes stung. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it inside the wooden box beside the locket. Then I closed the lid and held it between my palms. For a moment, I just breathed. Something inside me felt lighter, fragile still, but freed in a way I hadn't expected. I realized that even if Emily never read my words, even if she never knew I'd been there, writing them had changed something inside me. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd quietly abandoned along the way. Just as I stood up, ready to bring the box somewhere she could find it after the ceremony, I heard the sound of footsteps on the gravel path. I turned slowly, half expecting a stranger, half wishing for a miracle. Instead, I saw someone I hadn't expected at all. Claire. She was walking fast, umbrella tilted sideways, hair damp and clinging to her cheeks, eyes sharp with attention that made my stomach twist. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain filled the space between us, steady and cold. And then, with a breath that looked like it cost her something, she said the words that made the entire world lean in. "Dad, why didn't you come inside?" For a moment, I simply stared at Claire, unsure if her question was meant to wound or to reach me. Her tone hovered in that fragile space between accusation and concern, the same place where so many of our conversations had lived these past years. The umbrella tilted slightly in her hand, and a thin sheet of rain dripped off its edge, tapping rhythmically against the gravel. I took a slow breath, feeling the cool air expand inside my chest, and steadied myself. "I wasn't on the list," I said quietly. "They said there was no seat reserved for me." The words felt heavy even as I spoke them, like stones I'd been carrying for far too long. I watched her face shift, first confusion, then a flicker of shock, and finally something softer, something that resembled guilt. She looked away for a moment, adjusting the umbrella though it didn't need adjusting. That was always her tell. When her emotions grew too loud, she tried to rearrange the world around her to quiet them. "Emily told me she added you," she murmured. She said she did." There was a tremor in her voice, small but unmistakable. And for the first time in years, I realized Claire wasn't as composed as she always pretended to be. She was standing there, soaked, startled, suddenly a daughter again rather than the polished, distant woman she'd become. I wanted to let the silence sit between us, to see if the truth would rise on its own. But something in me, a tenderness maybe, or maybe exhaustion, pushed me to speak. "It's all right," I said, though I didn't entirely believe it yet. I just didn't want to cause a scene. I tried to smile, but it came out thin, barely there. Claire studied me for a long moment, her eyes glistening not just from the rain, but from something more complex. "It's not all right," she finally whispered. "Dad, Emily cried backstage when she realized she hadn't seen you. She thought you hadn't come." Her voice cracked slightly. "She asked me 3 times if maybe you got stuck in traffic. She was waiting for you." The words struck me with an unexpected force, like a sudden gust of wind pushing into my chest. She was looking for me. She didn't forget me. Something inside me softened instantly, like a knot loosening after years of tension. And with that release came another sensation. Regret. Not regret for leaving the hall, but regret for assuming the worst before understanding the rest. I felt both foolish and relieved, a strange combination that made my knees weaken slightly. "I waited outside," I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts. "In the car. I didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable." The admission tasted bitter, because it revealed more truth than I liked to show. It revealed how small I'd begun to make myself, how quietly I'd been stepping back from moments that mattered. Claire's expression softened again, the hard lines around her eyes easing in a way I hadn't seen in years. She took a step closer, lowering her umbrella slightly. "Dad, you shouldn't have done that," she said. "You should have called me, or gone inside anyway. They weren't going to throw you out." She tried to make it sound light, but there was weight behind the words, years of unspoken things rising to the surface. I could feel us both standing on the edge of something new, something fragile. I hesitated, then carefully lifted the wooden box so she could see it. "I made this for her," I said. I didn't want to ruin the day by handing it to her in the middle of everything, but I wanted her to have it. Claire looked at the box, her eyebrows knitting together as she reached out and touched the carved initials with the tips of her fingers. "You carved this?" she asked, as if she were piecing together a memory she had forgotten, one where her father used to build her wooden toys and fix her dolls. One where she used to sit in my workshop just as Emily had. I nodded. For a moment she didn't speak. When she finally did, her voice was barely audible. "She'll love it, Dad. She really will." A gust of wind blew across the garden, shaking droplets loose from the branches of the maple tree. Claire shivered. Though whether from the cold or from everything swirling between us, I couldn't tell. I felt a pang of something sharp, maybe longing, maybe hope. So many years had passed with tension thick between us, but in that moment, standing under the gray sky with rain slipping down our faces, we were simply 2 people trying to find our way back to each other. "I don't want to get in the way," I said. "I know your life is busy. I know Emily's grown now. My voice faltered, and Claire leaned in slightly, urging the rest out of me without saying a word. I just don't want to disappear, I finished. Saying it felt like taking a lantern into a dark room. Suddenly everything was visible. The shadows, the corners, the truth. Claire pressed her lips together, and her eyes shone with a sudden intensity. You haven't disappeared, she said. Not from us, not from her. She paused, and her voice softened into something I hadn't heard since she was a teenager. Dad, we drifted, all of us. Mom was the glue, and when she passed, everything got messy. I didn't know how to keep us together. I thought I was protecting Emily by not overwhelming her, but maybe I pushed too much. Maybe I pushed you away without meaning to. Her honesty cracked something open inside me, something I'd kept sealed for far too long. I felt a warmth rise in my chest, a warmth that came from being seen again after years of feeling invisible. I reached out and touched her shoulder gently. We all did the best we could, I said, and I meant it. The grief that had pulled us apart had never been intentional. It had simply been heavy, and each of us had carried it differently. She nodded slowly, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, letting years of distance slowly fold into something softer, something we might still repair. Then Claire took a breath and said, Emily's ceremony is ending soon. She'll come through the garden on her way to the reception. If you want, you can give her the box yourself. The thought sent a tremor of fear and joy through me at once. I looked toward the building, imagining Emily walking out in her cap and gown, the rain in her hair, her eyes searching for familiar faces. The idea of standing there, not hidden, not outside, but waiting for her, waiting with love instead of hesitation, felt like a chance to rewrite more than just this day. I'd like that, I said softly. And for the first time that day, hope didn't feel fragile. It felt possible Claire and I stood together beneath the maple tree, the rain easing into a faint drizzle that glimmered on the leaves like a thin veil of glass. The ceremony inside was ending. We could hear the muffled swell of applause filtering through the brick walls, rising and falling like a heartbeat. Each cheer felt like a drumbeat nudging me closer to a moment I wasn't sure I was ready for, but knew I needed. Claire shifted beside me, adjusting her damp hair behind her ear, and for the first time in a long time, her presence felt like comfort rather than tension. I held the wooden box in both hands, palms warm against its cool surface. My heart beat steadily, not with the frantic rhythm of panic, but with the quiet anticipation of someone about to step into a memory they haven't lived yet. I kept replaying the letter inside, wondering if the words were enough, if the truth inside them would reach Emily the way I hoped. But love, I reminded myself, isn't measured by certainty. It's measured by sincerity. And today, for the first time in years, I had been fully sincere. The doors of the graduation hall opened with a soft groan, and students poured out in waves of blue gowns and fluttering tassels. Laughter filled the air, echoing around the garden like bells. Families surged forward to wrap their graduates in hugs, umbrellas bobbing as people tried and failed to stay dry. My breath caught in my throat as I searched the crowd, body tense with an ache I couldn't name. And then I saw her. Emily stepped out slowly, her posture straight, but her face uncertain, her gaze moving like a lighthouse beam across familiar and unfamiliar faces. Her cap sat crooked on her golden hair, damp strands clinging to her cheeks. She held her diploma in one hand and her phone in the other, but her attention wasn't on the celebration. It was on searching for someone. Maybe for me. I felt a tremor move through me, the kind that comes when something longed for suddenly becomes real enough to touch. Claire noticed the way my breath hitched and nodded subtly toward her daughter. Go, she whispered. She's looking for you. I stepped forward before I could let fear pull me back. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes, and the entire world seemed to narrow to that single path between us. Emily's eyes swept past me once, then twice, and on the third time, they landed on mine. She froze. Her expression shifted instantly, all uncertainty washing away as emotion flooded her features. Her lips parted, and for a moment she looked like that little girl with paint on her hands again, running toward me with arms wide open. Grandpa, she breathed, taking a hesitant step. Rain clung to my lashes. but I knew some of the wetness wasn't from the sky. I nodded, unable to speak at first. My throat tightened with every emotion I'd tried to swallow all morning: love, fear, longing, hope, too large now to keep hidden. She closed the distance between us in 3 quick steps and threw her arms around me before a single word could leave my mouth. The force of it nearly took my breath away. She clung to me with a desperate relief that stunned me, her shoulders shaking lightly as she whispered, "I thought you didn't come. I thought you forgot." Forgot? The single word left me in a cracked whisper. I pulled back enough to see her face. "Emily, I could never forget. I was here early. I was waiting outside. They said I wasn't on the list." I tried to smile gently, despite how raw everything felt. "I thought maybe you were too busy for an old man like me." Her face crumpled, not in sadness but in disbelief. "No," she said fiercely. "Grandpa, no. I put your name first. I checked twice. If there was a mistake, it wasn't mine. I wanted you there. I kept looking for you." She placed her hand on my cheek, the gesture tender in a way that mirrored Lucy so perfectly that for a moment it felt like time folded in on itself. "You matter to me. You always have." The knot in my chest loosened, unraveling years of doubt that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. I reached for her hand and pressed the wooden box gently into it. She looked at it with curiosity, then at me with a softness that made the moment glow from the inside. "I made this for you," I said. My voice steadied, slow but sure. "There's something inside that belonged to your grandmother, and something from me too." She lifted the lid slowly, rain-damp fingers trembling slightly, and when she saw the silver locket, her eyes filled instantly with tears. "Grandma's," she whispered. "She would have wanted you to have it today," I said. "I wanted you to have it today." Emily traced the locket with her thumb, the same way I had done earlier, as if touching it connected her to something deeper, something rooted. Then she noticed the folded letter beneath it. She looked up at me with a small, questioning tilt of her head. "It's just the truth," I said softly. "Nothing more, nothing less." She didn't open it then. She held it against her chest instead, close to her heart. That small gesture alone felt like a healing I'd been waiting for, though I never knew how much until now. She stepped closer and rested her forehead against mine. A gesture so simple, yet so intimate it made the entire world feel still. "I'm glad you were here," she whispered. "Really here." "I always will be," I replied. And I meant it in a way that reached beyond the moment, beyond today, beyond even the boundaries age tries to impose. Claire approached quietly then, her eyes gentle, and for the first time in years, we stood together not as fragments, but as something closer to whole. Emily slipped her arm through mine, anchoring me to her side as if claiming me again, and I let myself believe that maybe this new beginning wasn't fragile after all. We walked together down the garden path, the 3 of us, the rain softening into a faint shimmer around us. As we reached the gate, I glanced back at the maple tree. Through the delicate curtain of rain, a single leaf drifted down, slow, spiraling, peaceful, landing on the stone bench where I'd sat earlier. It felt like a message, or maybe a blessing, maybe both. And now, if you're still here with me, if this story stirred something in you, some memory, some longing, some need to be seen, I'd truly like to hear it. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever stood outside a moment where you wished you'd been inside? Sometimes sharing our stories is how we find our way back in. I'll be waiting to read yours.